I'm David McElby, the Dean of the College of Family, Home, and Social Sciences, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this, the 7th annual Marjorie Pay Hinckley Lecture. We're pleased to have here this evening President Cecil O. Samuelson, a member of the 70 and president of BYU, and his wife Sharon, along with Sister Rosemary Wixom, general president of the primary, and her husband Jack, and Sister Cheryl Esplin, second counselor in the general primary presidency, and her husband Max. We welcome Elder Ben Banks, an emeritus 70, and his wife Susan. Also in attendance this evening is former academic vice president John Tanner and his wife Susan, and associate academic vice president Craig Hart and his wife Kirsten. We are pleased that 2 of President and Sister Hinckley's 5 children and their spouses or guests are here tonight. 3 of Sister Hinckley's siblings are also with us this evening, as well as several of Sister Hinckley's grandchildren. Welcome to you all. We also extend a warm welcome to faculty, students, and members of the community, and hope you enjoy tonight's lecture. Our invocation this evening will be offered by Ashley Kearns, a family life student from Harvest, Alabama. We express appreciation to the Hinckley Chair Advisory Committee, Jane Dudley, John Hoffman, Gordon Lim, Ginny Roby, Richard Miller, Diane Spangler, and Tina Dykes, for their ongoing work in overseeing this wonderful resource. Much of tonight's event was organized by Kim Reed, Patricia Wilson, and Robin Shumway of the Dean's Office. We express appreciation also to Charlene Clark and Lisa Willey of the School of Social Work for their help in directing the students, and as well as students from the School of Social Work and our Student College Council serving as ushers. They're the ones who've gotten you all so nicely organized compactly in your chairs. Thank you all. Please join me in expressing appreciation to the Dean's Office staff and the School of Social Work staff for all they've done to make tonight's event a successful event. We are honored in the college to be able to help perpetuate Sister Marjorie Pay Hinckley's legacy through this chair. Tonight's Marjorie Pay Hinckley lecture will be delivered by Dr. Ross Thompson, professor of psychology and director of the Social and Emotional Development Lab at the University of California, Davis. We are pleased that Dr. Thompson's wife, Janet, is with us this evening. Professor Thompson will be introduced by Professor Laura Walker of the School of Family Life. Laura?
I've been given the pleasure this evening of introducing the speaker for the 7th annual Marjorie Pay Hinckley Lecture, Dr. Ross Thompson, Professor of Psychology and Director of the Social and Emotional Development Lab at the University of California, Davis. I have the special privilege of having had Ross as my graduate mentor when I was working on my PhD at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. So please forgive me if I intersperse his impressive accomplishments with ways in which he's personally influenced my life and the life of countless other students. Dr. Thompson studies early parent-child relationships and the development of emotional understanding, regulation, and early moral development as they relate to policy concerns such as school readiness and early mental health. Dr. Thompson serves on the Scientific Advisory Board of the National Institute for Early Education Research and is a founding member of the National Scientific Council on the Developing Child. Dr. Thompson has testified before Congress and state legislatures, lectured internationally, and is a fellow of the American Psychological Association and the Association for Psychological Science. He's written countless professional research articles and numerous books on children's early socio-emotional development and has co-authored several best-selling undergraduate textbooks on child development and lifespan development. Dr. Thompson has been a visiting scientist at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development and Education in Berlin, a senior NIMH fellow in law and psychology at Stanford University, and a Harris Visiting Professor at the University of Chicago. He also received the Anne Brown Award for Excellence in Developmental Research in 2007. Dr. Thompson is one of those rare academics who excels at both research and teaching. and was a member of the Academy of Distinguished Teachers at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, where he spent over 20 years of his career, and where he received the Outstanding Research and Creative Activity Award. Dr. Thompson teaches large sections of Introduction to Psychology, so about 500 students a semester. And he's very well known for his exemplary teaching, both inside and outside of the classroom. I remember Dr. Thompson literally spending hours with me every week, helping to determine my research interests and shaping me into the educator that I am today. As his teaching assistant, he and I would often debate the deserved consequences of one of our freshman students who turned in a late assignment or who had failed to follow the directions. And Dr. Thompson was instrumental in teaching me how to balance justice and mercy so that I could optimize learning, although I'm pretty sure some of my current students might say I need a refresher while he's here visiting. Dr. Thompson's interactions with students and individuals clearly set him apart in the field, and I and countless others can see his influence in our research trajectories, in our teaching abilities, not to mention in who we are as individuals and parents. Thus, it's my honor to introduce you to my beloved mentor, my distinguished colleague, and my friend, Dr. Ross Thompson.
What a wonderful introduction. How sweet. Well, I am honored, deeply honored, to be asked to be with you this evening, and particularly to do so on this occasion when I am asked to speak as part of a set of activities that honor this remarkable woman for whom it is named. As one of the preparations I did for anticipating this time with you, I came to get to know Marjorie Pay Hinckley through her writings, through the DVD that you saw, and came to deeply admire both who she was as a person, who she is, and what she has brought to all of you. So it is a double honor for me to be asked to speak on this particular occasion in her honor as well. This is not my first visit to Brigham Young, and the warmth and the generosity of spirit of those that I encounter when I am here each time always make me look forward to the next visit and has helped to contribute to my anticipation of the wonderful time that Janet and I have had here. Thank you all so very much. I think you would agree with me that we live in historic times. We live in times that our grandchildren and great-grandchildren are going to be reading about and studying. We live in historic times because of the tumultuous events of the Middle East that we are learning about even this week. We live in historic times because of a historically unique national recession in our economy that we are digging through. We live in historic times because of our own domestic politics, and well, who knows, we may be living in historic times now if Brigham Young University ends up in the NCAA Final Four. Oh, that would happen. Go Jimmer. I want to argue that we live in historic times for another reason as well. And this has to do with the changes that are taking place in our understanding of early childhood development. We are moving to a place of new understanding of the importance of early childhood for lifespan, health, and development. And we will never go back again to the days in which we used to think that nothing much of importance happens in the early years that makes a difference for the rest of life. Your understanding of this, you're acquainted with this because you know some of the reasons that our changing understanding of early childhood development is taking place right before our eyes. One of those reasons, of course, is the new research on the explosive development of the brain that takes place in the early years of life that lays a foundation for lifelong achievement, health, and well-being. You also know that our national focus on school readiness, built on the brain development research, is part of what has drawn our attention to the early years as a period of preparation, not just for school, but also for lifelong achievement. And indeed, these changes in our understanding of early childhood development have changed our thinking about what young children are like. We now talk about the scientist in the crib, or in other contexts about the philosophical baby in appreciation of the remarkable powers of observation, inference, and insight that even are revealed in the casual play of a young baby and are revealing an incredibly powerful brain and mind at work. Now, these changes that I've been talking about are familiar to most of us because they have been unfolding for many years. But I would argue that we are in the midst of a third reason for historic changes in our thinking about children that is less familiar to us because it is building on research that we are currently in the midst of uncovering, and it has to do with children's emotions. We are discovering now, in research that is taking place in our lab and in research labs throughout the country, about the powerful role of emotions in forging social attachments in early relationships, in the emergence of social understanding, the importance of emotions for creating the foundations of psychological adjustment, and even providing a basis for cognitive competence and academic achievement. This new appreciation of young children's emotional life is moving us beyond the old days in which we saw children's feelings to reflect the primitive, the irrational, or the egocentric character of childhood immaturity. And they're moving us to a new day of understanding how emotions are the constructive foundation for some of the really important achievements we care about in the early years, including morality, self-understanding, and compassion for others. But in contrast to the good news story of brain development and the good news story of school readiness that tells us how we can optimize children's internal potential, there's a dark side to these new discoveries of children's emotional lives. Because we are discovering that while emotions have the potential to contribute to some of the most constructive, positive features of early psychological development, especially when children are growing up in supportive contexts, we also know that there is a potential for emotions to undermine children's healthy development, especially when they're faced with chronic adversity and threat. So in a sense, we are realizing that there are two sides to children's emotional lives, which is contributing now to a new understanding of early childhood development. One of those sides is the emotional child, as we have traditionally seen the child, with strong feelings that can take children to the peaks of ecstasy and the depths of sadness and can often be overwhelming. And new discoveries about the emotional child are giving us a new appreciation of the depth but also the vulnerability of young children's emotional lives. And then there is the emotionate child, another side of emotional development, which reflects new research on the importance of early emotional experiences as sources of social understanding and human connections to others. And so I'd like this evening to talk with you about these two sides of early emotional development, and also to talk about the implications, particularly of the emotionate child, for the development of self, morality, and social and emotional understanding. Let's turn first then to the emotional child. As long as people have written about children, emotions have been prominent in their descriptions. A couple of centuries ago, Jean-Jacques Rousseau described childhood in his famous novel Émile as a time when laughter is ever on the lips and when the heart is ever at peace, setting the stage for Victorian and post-Victorian sentimentality concerning children and children's emotions. But that's not the whole story, of course. Shortly afterwards, Freud began reminding us about the id-dominated young child who is utterly consumed with irrational emotionality and the relentless pursuit of gratification until the ego develops. Emotion, often seen as irrational, disorganizing, or upsetting, has long characterized how we have, all of us, thought about the nature of childhood, consistent with our prevalent portrayals of young children as carefree, egocentric, or under-controlled. This is an important part of the story of emotional development and has been given added insight recently by studies of children who are now studying in stressful circumstances. What we're discovering is that early emotional problems can be serious, especially for children under stress. We know, for example, from recent studies that roughly 10% of children in kindergarten show disruptive emotional or behavioral problems. Those of you who teach young children know how significant these can be in a classroom. For lower income children, the prevalence is double or triple this estimate. Head Start teachers are reporting to us that their children exhibit signs of serious emotional distress, including depression, withdrawal, and problems with aggression and antisocial behavior. More recently, studies from developmental neuroscience are telling us that chronic, uncontrollable stress experiences in early childhood, what I call toxic stress, to distinguish it from ordinary stress, can actually alter brain-based stress management systems, contributing to emotional dysregulation with the potential for impairing long-term learning and health. In the old days, we used to think that children are untouched by trouble, much the same way that water floats off a duck's back. We believe that although young children can feel and express their distress, their rage, their frustration, their sadness, their fear, and sometimes their joy with a great intensity, that they recover quickly, and within minutes, it seems, are ready to go back to play. But we are increasingly finding that when children do not have supportive relationships to help them in emotion management, early experiences of stress can have long-term consequences. And this new view, this new understanding of early emotional life and of the emotional child is telling us something new. That yes, the emotional lives of young children are deep and rich, but they are also vulnerable. And this is leading us now to ask new questions of early childhood that we would not have ever thought to begin asking when I was first a student studying children in this area. One of those questions was profiled not long ago in a cover story in the Sunday New York Times. And the question was quite simply, can preschoolers be depressed? When I was in graduate school, not so long ago, we were assured that preschoolers could certainly not get depressed because they lacked the psychological maturity to experience the depths of grief and sadness that true depression entails. And part of the reason we felt that way long ago was that young children can often manifest their signs of depression or anxiety in ways that are quite different from how adults show the same kinds of emotional turmoil, so their symptoms were relatively easy to overlook. But partly as a result of very careful studies conducted over the last 5 years by colleagues of mine who have looked carefully at how young children with emotional problems manifest them, we now have much more valid and reliable means of identifying early emotional problems when they occur. And when we compare the incidence rates of these common psychological problems in community samples of preschoolers compared to older children and adults, the results have been unsettling. With respect to depression, for example, we find rates for toddlers and preschoolers that are clearly measurable, lower than what we find in older children and adults, but clearly apparent. Yes, preschoolers can get depressed. And even more disturbing is the fact that we are also observing behavioral indicators of depression in infants and toddlers, especially those who are in the care of a depressed mother. With respect to anxiety disorders, the concern is even more unsettling because we are finding that prevalence rates for toddlers and preschoolers are actually higher than those for children and adolescents, although lower than those of adults. And when we compare these three age groups, for the overall incidence of any psychological problem, here's what we find. More than 16% of community samples of young children are showing signs of serious psychological and emotional disturbance, many of these coming from troubled families or dangerous neighborhoods. Now, the conclusion that young children can have serious emotional problems is new news to most of us, and it's important news for understanding that children can be affected by the stresses and adversity that they sometimes encounter. But this is not new news to those who work with children in these settings. When I talk to California preschool teachers throughout the state, when I speak nationally to early education groups, and I talk about the effects of early stress, what I typically get is a knowing nod. They've seen these children. And when I consult with my colleagues who have rescued children in the wake of natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina, they say this is exactly what they see, especially when these children have lost access to the adults who provide them with support. The good news in this picture is that we know that there are promising forms of assistance. A recent report from the National Academy of Sciences reports that the greatest opportunities for supportive strategies for prevention, intervention, and treatment are those that begin in early childhood, when the brain is still plastic, when children can respond still with some resilience. That's good news. But the best prevention strategy, of course, is to build in young children the sources of emotional health and well-being that will help them stand resilient and strong when adversity comes. And this brings us to the other side of early emotional development, the emotionate child. Now, I understand there have been some questions here about what do we mean by the emotionate child, so I provided a dictionary definition for you. We can characterize emotionate as being characterized by emotional apperception, sensitivity, or insight, as in her sympathetic response showed that she was an emotionate child. Or emotionate can be defined as marked by special bearing upon reference to her involvement with emotional understanding, as in an emotionate side to his nature. Clearly, by emotionate, we don't mean the old image of the emotional child who pointed us to the vulnerability and stress of early emotional life. By emotionate child, we're referring to the emotional resources that are the basis for the human connections that children share with other people, that provide them with social support and understanding, that motivate compassion and helping from an early age, and that form the positive foundation for morality and emotional health. And so the question we might ask then is, how does the emotionate child develop? We see the growth of the emotional child virtually from birth, when the raucous crying of a newborn infant and the petulant fussing crying of the baby that every parent responds to clearly shows the emotional child growing up. But if we watch closely, we can also see the emotionate child developing at the same time in the baby's quiet attentiveness to the emotions of her caregivers. In fact, the most remarkable discovery that we've been making is quite simply this, that emotion is a young child's first entree into another person's internal experience. And emotions thus constitute the core foundation for the psychological connections that we share with others. This starts very early.